Hi there, and a very warm welcome to this week's video. This week we're going to take a look at cycles again. So this has to do with the Fresnel formula and another video that I made about class in cycles where I'm referencing this. So back then I told you about that there's a more complicated way to get the fake shadows option, as you know that in Octane maybe. So what we're going to do today is build a material with subsurface scattering in cycles, but we're not going to use the subsurface scattering, so the random walk. We're using volumes for that, because volumes are a tad more realistic than using the random walk scattering method. Alright, this was quite a mouthful here. So without further ado, let's get started and let's see what we're doing. Welcome to our scene. If you're not a Blender user, don't be afraid. You can still learn stuff in here because I keep my tutorials rather universal. This video accumulates a lot of knowledge from other videos, so it's basically a mix from the Plastic Shader tutorial in Octane and also the glass tutorial, as I mentioned before, from Cycles. So basically we have to make refractive materials don't cast shadows, then do a fake shadows option, and then introduce some volumes. And this is what we're going to do today. Okay, let's finally have a look at the scene, but not without another backstory. So when I was searching for a SSS object, I found the Syringe, which was gifted to me by my good friend Benjamin. So this is an insulin syringe because his cat has diabetes. And actually I'm going to meet him next week on FMX in Stuttgart. So if you are also visiting FMX and see me, feel free to say hi. But yeah, this is the Syringe scene and it has different SSS materials on it. So we are going to take a look how to do them in the following steps. Okay, before you scream at your screens that the stupid Cinema 4D and Octane user has no idea that the principled BSDF actually has a subsurface scattering built in, let me show you two problems with that. So let's build the weight to 1. And 1 is quite obvious from the start. So if we zoom in, you can see a black border appearing here, which isn't quite natural. You can mitigate that look a little bit with a bevel and a SDS to round off the corners, but you still can see that there's something fishy going on. Now, the more shallow the SSS is, the less you see the effect. So if we make this a little bit more shallow, then the object actually looks okay. But with some of our plastics, especially those refractive ones, we need a very deep SSS. And therefore, there is the second problem that comes into play. So if we zoom out here, there's no way to make this object transparent and hold the SSS at the same time. Let me show you by making this object transparent or refractive by going to the transmission weight and set it to 1. And you can see there's no more SSS available, even if the weight here is set to 1. Now we could mix that, but this results in a very wonky solution. So let's follow me on my journey to get all of those problems fixed. When I first was faced with those problems, I thought maybe that's an easy fix by going to the volume here and get some volume inside of the object, because this is essentially what's happening inside of foggy plastics. And spoiler, this is essentially the route we are going to go to get our realistic SSS, but we are not there yet. So if we create a volume scatter here and then increase the density to get a little bit more dense inside here, let's say 25, you can see there is a darkness appearing. I didn't understand what's happening, so what I did was unplugged the surface here, and then the volume was working as expected. Now obviously what you need to do to get a little bit more realistic volumes is go into the render settings, light paths, max bounces, and then go to the volume and set this to a value other than 0. The higher the better, but this increases render time of course. So let's go with 3 for now, and you can see now it's looking fluffy and cloudy. So let's bring back the principled BSDF as the surface, and well, it's sort of working, but also it needs a long time to render. And this is because of one fact. All light that enters the object here is refracted, and therefore everything inside of the object is calculated by caustics, which are really heavy to compute. In Octane, I would just turn on fake shadows to mitigate that, to not have caustics for refractions. But in Cycles, there's no such checkbox, so we have to find our own way to make this. If that sparked your curiosity why actually caustics are so hard to render, I made a video about this. You can click in the upper right corner to find out more. If you have seen the Cycles class tutorial, I'm going to do the exact same thing here, but I'm going to go through it and explain it again. So what we need to do is get the shadows and the diffuse rays that are allowing the volume here to look nice, to be not distracted by the refraction. So we need a way to distinguish different rays. In most of other renderers, this is called ray switch. In Cycles, this is called light path node. So let's go for a light path here. Here we go. And this gives us all available light paths in Cycles. What we want to do here is switch materials based on the ray type. And the material we need is a material that is completely transparent. So let's go and make this material. And it's the transparent BSDF. So if we plug that in here, you can see then this looks the same as if we have no material attached. And if we disconnect the volume for a second, you can see with the transparent BSDF, we don't see anything of the object at all. In order to make different rays see different things, we need a mix also. So let's go for a mix. And a mix shader is needed because we are mixing shaders here. So let's mix this one here with this one here, and then just base it upon the shadows, for example. So let's plug this in. Right now we have a factor. So on one end we see the one material, and on the other end we see nothing, or the transparent BSDF. So instead we want to do that for the shadow rays, for example. And if we plug that in here, we can see now we don't have shadows from our object, which is what we need. What we still have though is caustics, and this is exactly what we also don't want. So if we go for the diffuse ray and plug that in here, you can see now we don't have any caustics, but our shadows are back. And to get both working, what we can do is a little bit of math. So what we can is add those both rays together. So the shadow ray and the diffuse ray, so we have none of them. Okay, this works nicely. Though the object looks very unnaturalistic right now because it has no shadows at all. So what we can do is go to the transparent BSDF here and darken it down a little bit to get back a little bit of shadows. But the better way to do that is with a Fresnel. But first, let's see how our volume shader fares. So let's go and plug that in on its own. And we can see it's nice and fluffy as ever. But if we plug in our shader here, you can see we just add our principled BSDF to our camera rays, and the volume still looks nice and fluffy inside, exactly what we wanted. Now, you might argue because of the volume the shadow is enough, and you would be right for this example, but if we go with a lower density, the object might start to look fake again. If you are totally okay with this look, you can jump to the next time mark. For the more nerdy among you, I'm going to go over how to get a correct Fresnel inside of here. I'm very glad you chose to stay. Welcome to the nerdy bit of this tutorial. What you're looking at is a slide of a presentation I usually do to teach people material physics. And what you can see here is the Fresnel equation in action. So the Fresnel equation is sort of taking into account the angle at which light is hitting the object, and therefore calculates how much energy is going into reflection versus refraction. So let's have a look at what we need to look at when it comes down to our shadow intensity. So if we look at the light going directly to the surface of the object, we have very little reflection, and therefore a lot of energy is absorbed into the material. So it's going inside and going through the material, and therefore we have very little shadow on the other side. Now, the steeper the angle is, the more energy it is going to be in the reflection, and therefore the less energy is going to be in the refraction. That means a lot of energy is going away through reflection, and therefore not that much energy is going inside of the material, and therefore the shadow should be stronger. And this is what we are going to do with our shader next. Welcome back to our scene. I tidied up the notes a little bit, so let's get going with our Fresnel. When we do that, we need to bring that into our transparent BSDF, because the transparent BSDF is controlling the density of our shadow. Just to repeat what we established before, when the light is hitting the object in a very steep angle, we want to have the shadow darker as when the light is hitting the object straight on. When I first did this, I thought, well, that's an easy fix. We have a Fresnel node inside of here, so let's go Fresnel and then take this. Also, this should always have the same IOR than the main material here, and then just plug it in here. Now, this can be the case that the material is inverted, so when the light is hitting straight on, we get a very dark shadow. This is not what we want, so we also have to invert that by an invert node. Here we go, invert color, and then we get somewhat what we want. So we can see the shadows darker on the edges where the light is hitting the object in a more steep angle. But we also have those parts here that are completely black. Now, what's going on here? Welcome to the tangent of our fake shadows shader, but you chose to get nerdy. I'm just delivering here. What you see here is a very old and rudimentary way to get a glass shader going. This is how it was done in the old Cycles days. So what you have here is a refraction and a reflection, and those are both mixed by the Fresnel to get this glass look. And of course, by changing the IOR number, you are changing the way the reflection and the refraction is mixed. But why show us this? What is important about this, you might ask? I did that to bring the attention to the Fresnel node and its behavior. So right now we are looking through a cube. But if we turn off the cube and turn on a plane and rotate that slightly, you can see everything behind that plane is now refracted and it behaves as we want. Let's turn on Blender's magical face orientation shader so we can see that we're actually looking from the outside to the inside of the object. Everything is good here unless we are turning the object to see the inside of it. And as soon as we've done that, everything turns into a reflection here. Unless we are going over a certain threshold in angle, and then everything is fine with a refraction. You can see that even more drastically if I solo the Fresnel here and then turn the object, and you can see there's this threshold at which we are going to a total internal reflection. That we don't want on our shader, but first let's open up a third tangent and look at what this actually does in reality. So if you stop by on the total internal reflection page on Wikipedia and scroll down a little bit, you can see a couple of examples. So for example, from this inside of a pool, you can see at some point you can see the outside, but if the angle gets steep enough, you only see the inside. And this is basically what Blender's Fresnel node is also doing. Here's another example. You can't see outside of the glass, just the boundary condition with the fingers, which is another effect. So what does this mean in terms of our Fresnel shader? Basically, if we look in from the front to the back, everything is okay. But if we look at it from the inside to the outside, dependent on the angle, we can get a totality and therefore we get a very dark shadow, which we don't want. So we need a shader that has the same characteristic no matter whether it looks on the front or the back side of the shader. And there is actually one that does that, which is the layer weight. So let's create one, layer weight, and you have the facing angle here. So if we collect that here and then rotate our plane around, you can see it's the same behavior on both sides. And this is how we are going to construct our Fresnel next. Okay, so we are finally at the end of our tangent-based odyssey, so we can take the phasing of our layer weight and exchange it with the Fresnel and be done with it. Unfortunately not. On this chart you might have seen the Fresnel curve as it's called, and you might also have seen that it's not linear. So the distinction between reflection and refraction is not going from 0 to 90 degrees in a linear fashion. On top of that, if we measure our layer weight, it is not linear either. So what we have to do is make the layer weight linear and then form the Fresnel curve out of it. Now, to be honest, this is not all needed and you can get a very good approximation with just piping in the layer weight. But as we said in the beginning, this is the nerdy part and we are going to see it through to the end. To tie in what we are doing a little bit with other renderers, so this layer weight node with the phasing angle and blend of 0.5 is basically what's called a fall-off in other renderers. And in all other renderers except Octane that I know, this fall-off also isn't linear. But of course, as always, there is a way to make it linear and this is with math. So let's go and create a math node and then click it in here and set it to the arc cosine. This is basically what it needs to make this curve linear, but the output isn't quite right yet. So if you look at the output, it is quite white, and this is because the output is now a 0 to 90 degree value, or as in 3D packages, the angles are always calculated in radians, is the equivalent of 90 degree in radians. So we need to figure that out next. So the easiest way to do that is to go to Google and call 90 degree in radians. Here we go. And then we have this number, which you're going to copy. Okay, almost done. Only a couple of steps more. So to bring this into a usable range, 0 to 1 I mean, we need another math node. And this will be set to multiply. And down here, just paste the value that we copied out of Google. And then bring it in line. And now we have a linear value. So it looks like this on the chart. To finally be done with it, in the last step, we just need a RGB curves. So let's produce one, RGB curves, here we go. And then what we need to do is match the Fresnel curve inside of here. You can of course eyeball the Fresnel curve, but let's use our nerdiness streak by going a step further as always. So you can go to refractiveindex.info, go to 3D, then go to plastics for example, anything that has a Fresnel that's close to 1.5. So I did go with this object here, and then scroll down here, make sure we are using the R curve, and then you can find the angle and the corresponding non-polarized value that you can give into your shader. I already done that, so I will paste that in here and then throw it in between here and also get this into the transparent BSDF. Now if we look at it, there's something wrong. We get brighter than white values out of this, and this is because I made a mistake before. This shouldn't be a multiply, this should be a divide. And now this is very dark, and this is because we need another invert. This is the last step here, I promise. So if we bring that invert here, then we have our final result. And this is mimicking the fake shadows in Octane almost one-to-one. Last but not least, what we can do is make this a little bit more compact by grouping it. So let's make a group out of it. And therefore we don't waste a lot of space using all of those nodes. Just the group inside of the transparent BSDF. This is the nerdy part done. Let's go back and shade our syringe. Welcome back everyone. So for those who jumped over the nerdy bits, I really recommend watching those. If not, that's absolutely fine too. So let's keep on going. Alrighty, let's start shading. Let's go with the object that's already selected. Let's go to materials and bring in the syringe material. So this material is what we had on our cube before, and you should be really familiar with it. All but the people that jumped over the nerdy bits, this is the only thing new here. But to be honest, this doesn't make a huge difference in our scene. It's good for other scenes, so you can leave it out if you want. If you want it, of course you can go over the nerdy bits, or you can download it together with the full scene on my Patreon if you become a member there. Before we actually plug in the volume scatter, let's have a look at the render settings real quick, because whenever we have more complex refractive objects, it is good to increase the ray depth. So I did that here to 24 with the total as well as the glossy and transmissive rays. Alright, now that we've done that, let's actually do what we came here to do and go to the volume scatter and plug it into the volume. And we can see now our plastic is starting to look milky and more like plastic and less like glass. And I want to even go further and set this to 500 here, so I get a really dense milky plastic. Very nice. Let's do our cap next. So for our cap, we actually going to steal our material, so let's use the same one here. And while this is looking really good, I really want to stay true to our original and make this a red color. Before we do any changes, I want to duplicate the material so we really have our own material on the cap. And then let's introduce some color. To do so, we need a new node, which is the absorption here, volume absorption. To bring those both together, to both plug into the volume, we need a add shader. And while this is a little bit controversial in use with other shadings, it is just fine to have that on our volumes and absorptions. Here we go. This is the way that is intended to. Okay, let's introduce some of the red color here by going here and get the saturation to a high value, 0.8 for example. And you can see nothing happens, and this is basically because the density is very low, so I'm going to go with a whopping 3000. Now, while this looks also cool, it's a little dark. To help that, we can go to the color once more and get the value to a higher value here. So maybe 0.98 or something, so you can see it's becoming really vibrant. Now this barely has some scattering in it, so we have to balance it out with the scatter, and I already know my value for that, which is 2000. Here we go. This makes it a little bit darker, and to mitigate that we have to go to our render settings one more time. So our volume only has a ray depth of 3. So to show you, if we go to 0, it really becomes dark, and when we go higher values, for example 8, this is now nice and SSS-y. So you can get even higher values, so let's go with 16, and the higher we go, the more fluffy it becomes. Of course, on the cost of render time, unfortunately. Let's leave it at this value. The only other thing I'm going to do is go to the roughness of the material and set it to 0.3, since the cap here is a little bit more rough than the rest of the syringe. Let's shade our stem next, so let's select it and go to the material and select the same one as the cap, actually call it cap, then duplicate it and call it stem, so we can change it. Now this looks nice in itself, but let's again stay true to the original and make this a dense beige color. So let's go here, make the color beige, and also make it a lot less dense, so 150. And then make the scattering a lot more dense by 5000. Here we go. So we have the densest part in our stem here. Looking nice. Let's actually shade those parts that don't have SSS. So this is the rubber here. So let's go to the rubber, create a new material. And the only thing that we need to do is go and get it to a darker color. 0.05 is okay. So it has a lot of roughness, and this is already preset. And last, also very simple, let's go and disable the cap here so we can see the needle. So in the needle, we just create a new material as well. Let's also call it needle, and also call the rubber material rubber. Here we go. Let's go back to the needle material. What we need to do is make the value here in the albedo a little bit darker, so 0.6 for example. Then go to the metallic, slide it to 1 since needles are usually metallic, and then go to the roughness and get it to 0.2. And now our needle is a nice metal material. So here we go. Let's turn on our cap again, and this is the syringe shading finished. Now, in my Patreon scene, or the scene that you've seen in the beginning, there are numbers on the syringe, and the materials are a little bit more finessed. And as I always say, you can download them and look what I did there with the Patreon scene. Alrighty, this was it. I hope you learned something, you had fun watching, and had a good nerdy time. As I said in the beginning, next week, almost the whole week, it's FMX, so I'm actually not sure if I can make it to make a tutorial next week, so let's see and hope for the best. Otherwise, if you have good ideas for new tutorials, please let me know in the comments down below. And now, without further ado, let's thank those people who made this video possible. Of course, my Patreons. Especially my €50 tier subscribers, Shields Augustinen, Just a Frickin', and Leon Studio TV. Also, of course, a huge thank you for my €15 tier subscribers, Render King, Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, Bavana, BVR, Chris Fritchie, Christian Grajewski, Erbe Plus Academy, George Luna, Graham Bagnall, Harish Pavaskar, Joel Mackimer, John Edward, Chris Clemson, Ludger, Muradan Axos, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Kuok An Dang, Raiko, Renato Marquez, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Tagori M. Vilela, Terry Wayne Ranson, Touch My Render, Yasin Rupp, and Shibue Xiang. Thank you all so very much for making it possible to produce those videos that you all enjoy. Welcome to the Waking Room. As always, I hope you enjoyed that no matter what renderer or package you're coming from. And thank you so very much for sticking with me that long. Now, as I said multiple times before, the biggest news this week is the FMX. I'll be probably hanging out with the Otoy team a lot, so hopefully I can see one or the other of you there. Have a great start into next week, an amazing week. Maybe we will see each other on FMX. Other than that, a fantastic time to you. Oh, and if you want to show your support, let's post a keycap star emoticon to symbolize the scattering of the SSS. Okay, again, have a great time and happy scattering. Bye.